So I think currently, I'll start with what I do currently and how I got here. And I currently run School of Accelerated Learning, SOAL for short. And the idea behind SOAL is that we want to redefine the way education, especially higher education, works in the country, in the sense that how do we sort of start building a pedagogy or a curriculum that actually helps people be creative and that helps people, sort of not follow the traditional path of taking a job and just sort of doing the same thing over and over again, but
Yeah.
actually get into the entire maker mindset of sorts. So
Yes.
we run programs that teach new age skills, that teach like programming, product design, product management, anything that's needed by the industry of today, and how we can produce a population that can further the entire development or creation of ideas and solutions in the country as a whole. For me, I think I started off by doing commerce. Like as a kid, I didn't really have too much options, and I ended up taking the option that I was very familiar with. But I think through my college years is when I realized that this world is way bigger than this really small perspective that I was looking at it from. And I think ever since I've sort of spent a lot of time exploring a lot of ideas, a lot of perspectives, not only in India but around the world, understanding how it works. And I think there's been a continuous realization of, oh my God, I was so wrong, right? And there's like so much that exists in this world that I didn't even know about or that I had no clue about. And that led to me getting into software development or, trying out something that was completely opposite from what I was doing, which was commerce, and moving to like software. And, which eventually led to me also trying out a lot of interesting things, like, let's say, going to SF for a year, right? Which was with no real plan as such, or sort of spending time and going and helping out the tech team in Burning Man, for example, right? It was more about
Right.
just gaining experiences. But I think one of the key things that has sort of stuck with me over time is how experiences are way more important than knowledge or information, right? So you could read everything that you want to read and you could see everything that you want to see, but till you don't really experience it, you don't
Yeah.
sort of understand how the world works, right? And the world
Yes.
is very different from what we are taught, especially in schools, right? It's nowhere close to how the world works, especially in like the
Yes.
system that we are in. So yeah, that's a little bit about like me and Soul and what we are working on. So we in fact have, so we started doing with Soul,
So
we do.
maybe, yeah, exactly. Like the model of soul. How can one be a part of soul?
Yeah, so what we do with Soul is that you could so we have like an entrance test where we sort of understand what your aptitude is, whether you would be fit for being a software developer, for example.
Right.
And then it was then you sort of, we've built a curriculum where you learn by failing, essentially, right? So I think one of the core issues that we noticed, which we sort of okay, yeah. One of the core issues that we noticed, which we incorporated in the model of Soul, was this entire idea of learning how to learn. Right? It's very ironic that we spend almost 14 years of our life in an education system which never talks about learning, right?
Yeah.
Which never talks about how do you learn anything or how do you sort of pick up topics, right? It's only
Yeah,
about
somehow
how do
it's
you.
just like finishing one class after one class after one class after one class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always about like, like I remember, like I'm sure it's the same for you as well, but the questions in school would always revolve around kaun sa question paper mein aayega, right? And
Yes.
what are they gonna ask us, right? But
Yes.
real life does not give you like a question paper, right? So
Exactly.
so that is the entire perspective we've built Soul from, where we've said that, first understand how learning works. And this is one of the examples that I like to take a lot, is like when you learn how to ride a bicycle, right? You fall like 100 times before you actually learn how to ride a bicycle.
Yeah.
But that does not mean the 100 times that you fell was not required, right? You had to fall down to learn how to ride a bicycle. So essentially, learning is only about failing. The more you will fail, the more you will learn. But I think it's because that we are in, that fail or you have failed is such a big scare, right? It's such a big fear that nobody wants to ever
Right.
fail. Everybody always wants to just be right. Everybody always wants to just be right on their first time, and you can never be right in your first time, no matter what you
Right.
do, right? It's always
Yes.
about iteratively getting better at things, and that is what that's how we've designed the curriculum as well at Soul. So, apart from software development, we focus a lot on mindset. So I think our core focus is on that. How do we get somebody to get into a growth mindset, right? How do we get somebody to sort of understand that, yeah, I will fail and there will be a lot of confusion, and like it will sort of lead to clarity at some point, but it's not going to come
Without that
immediately.
confusion, that clarity is impossible to
Exactly.
happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like one of the funniest things, right, is that from all the people who have been through Souls programs, uh, I have had people who have broken down, right, and they've been like, I don't think I can ever learn software development. And it's weird. It has nothing to do with whether they know software development or not. It has nothing to do with whether they're smart or not. It only has to do with what they believe about themselves, right?
Right.
And the moment you sort of have a conversation and you say, hey, but I feel like you're doing great. Like, okay, it's okay. You're getting like 100 errors, but yesterday you were getting 300 and today they are down to 100 and
Right.
they might be 500 tomorrow. But as long as you sort of keep battling that and sort of keep having that battle continuously, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult for somebody in India to even agree with that thought, right? It is so difficult, and I think it also is a result of the environment that you have been brought up in. So
Right.
I'll give you another example. So we had somebody who was in the army, the Indian army, and he came to us and we told him that, listen, there are no like fixed class timings, there is no like schedule, there is no like exam, nobody's gonna give you a rank. And it was so strange for him, where it was just like, I don't agree with you at all, right? Because
Hmm.
he's come from a system where everything is defined, where everything
Exactly.
has like an exact, like, sort of, yeah, from 2 to 4 we are going to do this, and then 4 to
Yeah.
4:15 is a break. And when you tell them that, listen, this is utter chaos and it's just going to be a lot of things that are going to happen together, and you sort of tap in and learn from it, it's very difficult to sort of connect to that.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what the soul model is all about. It's about getting people to realize that, hey, it's in the end it's about learning. In the end, it's about making stuff. In the end, it's not only about getting a job or just sort of going and working for a company, but it's about what you do with the skills that you have built.
Right.
Like, a lot of people can write code, but can you sort of build Uber is the real question. Can you
Exactly.
like
Can you
think that
solve problem with your technical
absolutely,
knowledge?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So yeah,
So
that's what soul is about. Yeah.
right. So, Raj, can you comment upon what is an idealistic Indian success story and how does it separate one from their self-discovery? Because I think
Yeah.
everybody has a pre-notion of, okay, my child is born, my child is
Yeah.
going to become this. So
Yeah.
everybody knows what their one-year child is going to become.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So, what is your comment on an idealistic Indian story, success story?
So I think I'll just, before the idealistic success story, I'll talk about the typical Indian success story, right?
Right.
And the typical Indian success story is a complete lack of self discovery. If you're self discovering, you're not a success in India. Right. So it's because it's basically, the idea is that hey, you are going to go to, like, let's say an IIT, for the lack of a better example, then you will work for 2 years and then you will do an MBA and then you will get a job, and by the end of it you will become like a VP or something of that sort, and that's it, right? I mean, like, think about the way the system is designed in India, right? After spending 10 years of this entire rat race exam mindset of writing papers and trying to get like 99 on 100, and getting like negative marking for writing one word wrong, and nobody cares about what ideas you're presenting. What they care about is that this formula was written in a particular way in the textbook, so why didn't you write it in the same way,
Yeah.
right? When we are in 10th or 12th, we are asked that, hey, do you want to do science, or do you want to do commerce, or do you want to do arts, right? Like, I'm in 10th, I'm in 12th, I haven't seen the world, I haven't even like had the experience of what like somebody in philosophy does, right?
Yeah.
So what you end up doing is you just sort of end up taking what the world around you is doing, and you say, what, I'm just going to sort of pick one, like the best of the three options that stick to me, And
Yeah.
the other thing is we have this classification, right? Like if you're really smart, you go to science. If you're like
Yeah.
kind of smart, you go to commerce, and all the dumb fucks will go
Yes.
to basically
No, I
arts,
was about to
right?
say that, Raj, everybody does not have those three big options. Like mostly they tell that, see, you are made for math or you're made for science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And like, God forbid if you are interested in something like photography or like creating music, because that is like out of the window immediately. It's like really you want to just like sort of become a DJ
Screw up your
and
life. Yeah.
yeah, like screw up your
Yeah.
life and like you're going to end up on the streets or something, right? And that
Yes.
option does not exist at all. And the very funny part about it is that those creative passions which at least in our generation have been dismissed completely, are earning the most. Like, and I'm taking earning as like a catch-all sort of metric, right? But let's say if you were into art or if you were into design, right, the kind of
Imagine.
opportunities that are there right now is insane, right? But nobody ever took it seriously. Like philosophy has become so mainstream, right,
Yes.
that business decisions are driven by philosophy. They're driven by understanding like incentives of humans and
Yes.
thinking about first principles and cognitive
No,
biases
take
and
I mean, emotional intelligence, for example. Nobody
exactly,
spoke about
yeah,
EQ 5, 10 years ago.
exactly,
Yeah.
and spoke about it, or even like even talking about, okay, let's say the education system is on one part, right, where you're saying the education system should talk about emotional intelligence,
Right.
but in my entire life nobody has ever spoken about emotional intelligence,
Right.
right? Like I don't know how to deal with a confrontation. Like who's
Yeah,
going to talk
even
about
now
that?
there are very few people who speak about emotional intelligence. And then we feel
Absolutely.
that, okay, wow, they know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But coming back to that point of the idealistic Indian success story, I think majority of it is about this notion of settling down. Like settling down somehow is very important in our culture,
Yeah.
right? Whether it be in whether it be in your personal life or professional life, everything eventually comes down to let's settle down, right?
Yes.
And that is something that I find very funny because both the words have a negative connotation to it. Firstly, you're settling. Right. So it's like, okay, I could have achieved, but I'm going to settle. Right.
Yeah.
And the second thing, you're not settling up, you're settling down.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a bad joke. But the thing is, like, it's basically the entire culture is driven by let's settle and let's sort of get. But I think what people try to say by that is having a stable life, right? And of course, like going all crazy about let me follow my passion and let me go and make try and see if I can be, let's say, the best DJ in the world, comes with its risks. It's not risk free. So I think
Yeah.
eventually what as a culture we are very risk averse, right? Like even if you think about it economically, or even if you think about it, the way we drive decisions in like business or like in investing, or like I'll take a simple example, right? Like in the US, the entire culture is to spend first and then earn. Right. So
Yes.
like getting credit or like spending is not really that big a thing. But in India,
Yes.
you're like from the time you were a kid, it's drilled into your head that if you earn 120 needs to go into a fixed deposit account. Right.
Yes.
And that is what sort of leads to a lot of people going and selecting a stable income over like or maybe a larger reward, which comes with its own risks. So I
Very
think
true.
if in today's world, if you had to play this, I think it would be, I think one, you should focus on skills, because skills is what you get paid for. Like the entire idea of a degree is going to get me a job is slowly diminishing in our country as well. And
Yes.
I think a lot of people are getting paid for the kind of things that they can do and not really for the kind of college that they're from. um, I think the other thing why colleges in the first place also worked, why we have this entire IIT IIM culture, is also fair in its own sense because we are 1.3 billion, right?
Yes.
Like I need a metric to sort of know who's better than the other person. And for this is just an easier way to do this, right? It's just an easier way of saying I'm going to create like the toughest exam that exists, and then I'm going to take like the top 5% or 10% and pray to God that they are going to be awesome, right? So you are filtering for just somebody who's really good at mugging up or is really good at understanding formulas and implementing it in a very specific scenario. Right. So let's say if this were to change to where people would start getting judged on how creative you are, right?
Yeah.
Then we would start looking at a very different kind of workforce that comes out of the entire system. So I think
Yes.
right now the focus should be definitely on skills. With and the other thing which I find very very important is the kind of people you surround yourself with. I think it's very basic, but like there are a lot of people who will spend a lot of time in things that are not even relevant to your life, right? Like whether it be, let's say, movies or Bollywood or politics or whatever it may be, right? In the end of it, you want to be around people who are also trying to push that envelope everywhere. And that's when you sort of end up being in this culture of let's always strive to push the universe a little, right? So yeah, that's what I think an idealistic success story should look like. But I think we are far from that for now.
Right. So,
Yeah.
Raj, you have traveled a lot, and how does
Yeah.
travel integrate into the education system and development of a child? Because I see that in the Western countries, especially, people travel a lot from a very young age. So
Yeah.
it really opens them up. They have a very different kind of exposure, and they've seen
Yeah.
diverse, they have experienced diverse things. So, how do you
Yeah.
think that integrates into the education system and how it impacts a child?
I think the most important role of travel is that it completely destroys your notions, right? It completely destroys your beliefs, right? Like let's say we've been brought up in a system which believes that this is the best that there is, right? There's only doing certain things. Only one right way of doing certain things is what the education system sort of helps us get to, right? Like you solve a problem in ways, you can solve a problem only in one way, right? The travel does is that it sort of shows you the world and then it tells you, are you sure that's right? Like, are you sure it's one way? Like, like I'll give a simple example of like when I went to Japan, and I think Japan is so obsessed with procedure and process, right? That everything is like on point. Like, if the train has to leave at 7:01, it will leave at 7:01. And if it doesn't, they can apologize to you. Now,
Yeah,
that's a very strange concept for an Indian to sort of get, right? In a country where trains are delayed by a day and a half, right? You don't really understand that how can everything function exactly on time, right? But that's also a way, and that works beautifully for them, right? Or the other example being, let's say, the US, right, where the government does not do any business. So there are no publicly owned entities whatsoever, right? From the metro to the airlines to the airports to the everything is run by a private entity, right?
right.
And I have I had always assumed that अच्छा railways तो government ही चला सकता है,
Hmm.
right? You go there and you realize that no, that's not true. Like there is a completely different system that is built in a completely different from a different perspective than what India's system is built from, and that completely changes the way you look at the world, right? So you start
Yeah,
realizing there's no one right answer. There are
yeah,
multiple answers. It will create their own problems, right?
yeah,
So that is what this is about. Like any system that you implement will create its own set of problems. But I think travel does that. Travel opens you up to like, being okay with a lot of things that you thought were wrong, right?
yes,
It realized that, the lens from which I was looking at this world is a very limited lens.
right.
And I need to add a lot more lenses so that I can get like a truer perspective of what this world looks like.
Yeah, the
So
judgment becomes almost zero. The more you travel, the less you judge about any.
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, like, it's just you sort of start questioning your own biases, in a
Yeah,
certain way.
yeah,
Because you sort of like, and we I think like at least I was bought like, I had a lot of biases before I started traveling, where it would be something as stupid as like, for lack of like African Americans are always bad. This is something that's been like, it's always told to us in some way or the other, right? Or the fact that, oh, we should like, don't trust a stranger, right? Never trust a stranger. In fact, like some of my closest friends right now have been absolute strangers who I've met at absolute strange points, right?
right.
And so
Raj,
it
we
helps you
both
understand
met
that.
as strangers, like absolute
Exactly.
strangers. Yeah.
As absolute strangers, right? And
Yeah.
then, but that's only because we sort of met at a point after we were like done with those notions,
Yes,
right? And we were
yes,
open to like sort of, yeah, let's meet somebody as a person and not
yes.
really with my biases. So yeah, I think that travel, and it's not only about international travel. I think even like in
Any
school,
travel for that
any
matter.
travel, yeah, right. If you just sort of go to a village or go to like a city or go to like a factory, it always just keeps on opening your perspectives about a lot of things.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what I think travel plays that for sure. I think it's a lot about just undoing your biases, and very subconsciously. It's not something that's conscious. It's just
Yeah.
like when you travel and you come back, suddenly you realize that wait, I'm a
The
different person, but I
reflection,
haven't
there's a time you
realized.
self reflect.
Yeah, exactly, and
Yeah.
that's when you
Yeah.
realize. But it's not conscious. So yeah.
Yes. So, Raj, moving on to the education system, see, the education system includes parents too, and the blueprint is made at a very young age, as we spoke about. So, do you think it ultimately damages the transformative ability as an adult? Because you don't
Uh,
accept a lot of things, it becomes very hard to unlearn as an adult.
so
So,
yeah, yeah, it's this is a thing that I'm. So okay, let's look at three generations, right? So let's look at our generation, let's look at our parents' generation, and let's look at our grandparents' generation. The difference between our grandparents' generation and our parents' generation was minimal, so to say, right? It wasn't that
yes,
significant. The
yes,
difference between our generation and our parents' generation is exponential compared to like
yes,
that difference, right? Because the world has completely changed, right? So in that sense, what ends up happening is that you are uh, like at the same time you want to sort of learn from the experience that your ancestors have had, because basic things will always remain the same, like basic
yes,
things are not going to change,
yeah,
but the way you're applying it to a new world is what changes completely. So again, as I said, right, when you're forced to take a decision on like science, commerce, arts in 10th or 12th standard, what are you going to base that decision upon? You're going to base that decision upon, okay, let me look to my role model in life at that point, which is
yeah,
like my parents, and understand what they have to say, right? And the other thing is that it's very difficult in this world, in this scenario that we live in. It's very difficult to predict 5 years from now, right? Where for our parents generation it was quite simple that so let's think of that, right? 30, 40 years into independence, approximately, or maybe 40, 50 years into independence, the economy is still stabilizing, you're not in a growth phase, you're still trying to find yourself as a country, you're
yeah,
still trying to find yourself as an economy, right?
yeah,
And what would give you security at that time is definitely being better than others, right? And what was being better than others? Being better than others was a medallion or a degree, right? Because again, 1.3 billion people, the filter always is going to be that,
yeah,
yeah, I'm not going to spend my time and individually assess everyone. I'm just going to look like a filter across the board and do that. And that's why it makes sense that, people would say that, yeah, why don't you do an engineering and then work for some company for 2 years and then do an MBA? Or फिर तो मजे ही मजे है life में, like, and that's true also in a certain way, right? कि मजे है, you will have like a steady stream of income, and you will have like a steady job. You will like, it will all be settled essentially. But what that does is that it completely takes away the risk taking ability again, right? So the opportunity to sort of explore what's out there reduces significantly.
yeah,
Which then, so if you think about the kind of businesses that thrive in India, are very safe businesses, right? Because it comes from this thought process of being safe all the time,
yeah,
right? So, like a very simple example is if you look at a lot of the massive tech unicorns that we've seen, all of them have been Me Too's, right? They've all been like an idea that already existed, which has been sort of like converted and made India specific, right?
yeah,
Like for like made for India, and it's not
hmm.
made in India. So that entire made in India sort of takes a hit in this entire process of one of the funny things that I find is when parents say that we have given you enough freedom, right? And it's funny because you're like, shouldn't there be absolute freedom any which way? Like, thanks. Like, why am I getting freedom? Shouldn't that exist? But yeah, I think that also has a lot of merit, because they've come from a world where it was a lot tougher to sort of get value generation, right? And it's become a
Yes,
lot easier now. But
yeah,
at the same time, the conversation has moved from the way you would do it 20 years ago is very different from the way you would generate value right now, which sort of changes what you should strive for. So as I said, like skills is what will get you that value right now.
yeah,
But like a medallion or a certificate is what would have gotten you the value 20 or 30 years ago.
yes.
So
And
yeah,
in either ways, India is a skill-based economy. It
yeah,
is an absolutely skill-based economy, and we have more than 70% living in the rural.
correct. Yeah, and that's, I mean, like, again, so that's one more thing, right? Like when we talk about rural India, I am I have very little knowledge to even comment on it. Right. I have very little experience to even relate to them.
Right.
Right. Like it's one thing to sit in my like house and like sort of think कि हाँ शायद ऐसा होता होगा.
Hmm.
But I've never been in that situation to even relate or empathize with somebody who doesn't even know India as a whole. Forget like the world as a whole, right? Who's
Right.
not even traveled from their village. Like the max that they've traveled is to like the closest town,
Hmm.
which also is like 100 the size of a city like Bombay. Right. And that I think is that economy definitely is completely skill based. So I
Yes.
think that economy is only about like what can you do something with yourself which will generate value. I think
Yes.
the higher up you go in that economic status, the more it becomes about badges and certificates and less
Exactly.
about skills, which I think even in the higher education is now changing slightly. Right. And which is why it's a great opportunity for, like, let's say if you want to be a software developer, right? Nobody's going to ask you whether you're from a village or not. Nobody's going to ask you, like, whether you've studied development or not. All they'll ask you is that, listen, can you code? Can you, like, build
Yes.
software which will actually work? And if you can, great. And I think that in itself is going to sort of drive it. So, like,
Right.
I'll tell you one example. Like, I was thinking about this that the amount that an Amazon or a Flipkart has done for a small and medium maker in, let's say, who's sitting out of Jaipur or like a tier two, tier three town, right, is a lot more than any other government scheme could have ever done for them. Right, not
Hmm.
only in terms of generating revenue and value, but also opening them up to this entire idea of the new age world. Right. So like the new world order, like where you can, instead of selling your shoes for like $100 in your town, you can now sell it for $500 online and it's still cheaper. So yeah,
Yes. And I think India has that diverse market.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So,
So
what is your comment on now? Because I'm working in the sector of women, like I'm working in gender
yeah,
equality space. So,
yeah.
women consist of half the population in India. What are the reasons behind India having only 14% in the parliamentary leadership positions?
Uh, I
How
think
does education system impact that? Because we are not told to be leaders.
that's right. I think it's one of the things that I find really funny is that in school girls will typically do better than boys, right?
Yes.
Like typically, like it's that, and by the time you hit like college, that percentage reduces significantly, and by the time it comes to workforce, that percentage is almost negligible, right?
Yes.
And I think again that comes from this entire idea of the role of a woman in today's society, right? And it is still the old school idea of a woman has to like take care of the house and be at home and like like your work is kind of like a passion, right? Your work is something that is like not the primary focus, it's something on the side which you're
Yeah.
doing just to spend your time, right? And on top of that, you're talking about women entering politics, which in itself is seen as like a really, really not too lucrative system to get into, right? And but like, so let's say if I juxtapose this to a country like the US, right,
Hmm.
which has never had a female president, right? In that sense, we are very open to that idea, right?
Yes.
Like we are very open to that idea of where we've had like female prime ministers, chief ministers, home ministers, finance ministers, all kinds of things, right? But ironically, again, when you look at absolute number of MPs, that percentage is significantly lower.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. I think for now we think of politics as this thing that you want to stay away from, especially for women, because you think it's dirty and it's going to get like all, like people are gonna like malign you and stuff like that. And I think over and above that, the entire idea of it's not a woman's place to be still exists. I mean that it's not only politics. I think it's also like I was looking at the billionaires list, right? And look at the number of women billionaires that are there in this country. It's like there are hardly any, right? And it's not just about it's not like they're not over there. It boils down to how many are there at mid management, How many
Right.
there are there at junior management? How many are there who are, and that number significantly reduces. So in the workforce, let's say you might have a 40 is to 60 ratio. The moment it comes to junior management, is going to reduce down to 20 is to 80. And by the time, I can guarantee you, right, if you look at some of the biggest companies in India, their boards won't have a single women director if it was allowed
Yes.
that. Right. And the reason for that is because there are not enough women to sort of like that filtration process, like the funnel needs to increase. Right. The
Yes.
funnel is only so tight that, you know, by the time you get to like the highest position, wherever it may be, whether it's politics or businesses or anything,
It
it's
gets
very
scarce.
difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very scarce. And that is a systemic issue, right? So it's not something which you can solve. And that systemic issue is, I think education sort of sort of helps you undo this, right? Because a lot of this is driven from your home. It's not really driven by education. It's
Exactly.
driven by society, right? And education sort of helps you undo a lot of these things and get into like this idea of like, it's fine. Like, it's not an issue if somebody wants to be ambitious, or if somebody wants to like, become like the Prime Minister of India. It's completely fine.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that will stop a woman from doing it as compared to a guy. And I think and education definitely plays a part, because, again, examples is what matters, right? So when you sort of read about, let's say, like Sarojini Naidu, or you read about like Madame Curie, or you read about Mother Teresa, right? You sort of start building those beliefs. And I think the other thing is also about role models, right?
Yes.
And it's that is extremely important.
Indians
I
have a
mean,
very strange notion of having Western role models, and we don't like our own role models who are around
yeah,
us.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I
But
don't know
what
why that is.
truly can inspire you is somebody around you who's able to do it
Exactly.
from somewhere you belong.
Absolutely. And I think those role models are increasing by the day, right?
Yes.
So I'll give you one more aspect of this, right? If you look at women-led industries, there has been hardly any disruption in those industries whatsoever. I mean, I'll give you a simple example, right? Zomato, does like structuring of restaurants,
Hmm.
right? Another example is salons and spas and beauty centers, which is a very similar model, which is basically those are the same kind of, like, it's repetitive business. There are like
Hmm.
as many salons and spas as restaurants are there. You spend as much money as you spend in restaurants as you spend in salons and spas, but there is not a single aggregator which aggregates salons and spas or looks into that, right? Like, it took a Nika, which was a massively female-led company, to come and disrupt the entire beauty segment in this market.
Yes.
And if you look at any women, like, or let's look at like the entire idea of like sanitary napkins, and how long it took for the I forget the name of that individual who sort of like made those cheap sanitary napkins.
The
And
period, the guy who, yeah, I forgot his name.
yeah, the guy who made like the cheap low cost. But I'm saying
Yes.
it's just like, this boils down to like, people don't realize that there's a massive market that we are leaving out, right?
Yes.
And the other thing is that it's not only about women. Like, if I remove the gender bias, right? And let's say I'm looking at 50% of my population not participating in the economic welfare of a country, which means that I'm losing out on 50% of brain power more than
Yes.
anything else. Which means
Yes.
that there are a lot of solutions that could have been possible, which are not possible today, only because that one half is not allowed to talk.
Exactly.
In whatever way. So
Yes.
yeah, but I think education can definitely help break that, rather than like fuel it. So yeah.
So, do you want to sum it down to like any famous traits of Indian education system that like you can sum down to? And do you also feel that having different languages,
Huh.
because many different languages,
Huh.
affects our education system because it's very hard to like go regional and have a common structure also. So,
Yeah.
just one comment on does it affect?
So I think multilingual is something that is a great thing. So, one of the funny things, I had this when I was in SF and Dev boot camp, and I think I was talking to a friend of mine from India, right? And when you're talking to anybody who's in India, you'll switch. So you'll switch from like English to Hindi to like Gujarati and back to like Hindi and English, and it happens very seamlessly, right? And the Americans were blown away. They were like, "How can you do that?" Right? And I'm like, "I don't know how can I do that. I'm just born this way, right?" And it's something that we take for granted a lot of times. This idea of like knowing multiple languages and just switching and sort of understanding it, but it definitely helps you, like it develops your brain in a certain way.
Yeah.
Right. I think the other thing that's happening is that English is becoming the default language across the education system for the same reason, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's good that that's happening because you do need one common language to sort of, like, let's say programming. I'll take the example of programming. I have to teach programming in English. All the docs are in English, all the languages are written in English, your Stack Overflow, GitHub, all these websites are in English. So I can't really sort of go and say, like, hey, I'm going to translate the world for you in whatever your local language is. But the risk on the other side of this is like dying down of languages, which is something, this is again about the point that you mentioned, that we look to like foreign role models more than we look to Indian role models. That also applies to, we are proud of a lot of foreign culture than we are of Indian culture in some way or the other, right? Deep down, we feel a little ashamed to sort of talk in our Indian language, right? If you're like, let's say if you have foreigners around you, and that I think definitely should be preserved, right? So like the languages, like Sanskrit is one example of it, right? Where I know for a fact that a lot of leading researchers on Sanskrit are not Indians. And I mean, and it's fine. I really don't care about whether you're Indian or not, as long as like the development of the language is happening. But I'm sure this is true for a lot of other languages and a lot of other Indian concepts as well, right?
Yeah.
Where you're sort of like giving up on them. So it's important to sort of have a balance between the two of them. And I think overall, as an education system, I think the biggest problem, or like if I had to sum it up in one statement, I would be like, is that this system like has helped us only answer questions, right? It has not taught us how to question. Whereas the role of an education system is to teach you how to question things. It's not to help you answer questions. The role should be that first come up with the right questions and then strive to build solutions for that, right? Whereas we have been taught for like a good 14 years of our life that how do I give the perfect answer to any question posed to me? And that's not how the world works, right? There's no perfect answers. Like, and that's why you see a massive gap between like when somebody graduates. So I'll give you a realistic example of a tech unicorn, right? Where they said that, the way we hire developers is that we go to like the top 10 IITs, triple ITs, bits, whatever, and we take like five people from each of them, and then we send them through a training program, and at the end of it we realize that only 10% of them actually know how to code. So the other people we will either put in sales, or we'll either put in like product management or whatever, and these people we will retain, right? And that basically comes from that entire idea of we are all striving for answers. Like, there are websites that teach you how to answer questions in an interview. I mean, like, that is a direct product of our education
Frequently
system.
asked questions in the
Frequently
interview.
asked questions in an Infosys interview, frequently asked questions in a Google interview. How do you answer that? Like, we have this entire idea of, like, if two friends are applying to the same job, the first question you will ask them is, "Arey, dekho kya pucha, batana," right? And you sort of hope that, I will also get the same questions. And the focus is not on, am I relevant to, so one thing that we did for SOAL, like, I'll give you an example of where we sort of asked the students that, why don't you tell us what companies you are interested in? Because if I come to you and I tell you, hey, there are 10 companies who want to hire you, you are going to pick the one who pays you the most, right? And
Yes.
that is not going to lead to your development. You should be working for something that you're truly interested in, where you get excited to go and work, right? Where you get excited to sort of spend 8 hours a day. You need to get excited by those problems, right?
Exactly.
And we reversed the entire thing. We said that, why don't you come to us and tell us that, hey, here are 5 companies that we want to work for, and we will reach out to them and sort of set up interviews for you, right? And
That's
it's been
really
phenomenal.
interesting.
Like, we've seen like one cycle of appraisals, and we have seen people move into like team leader roles in less than a year, right? Only because they were driven by that vision of the company, they were driven by the work that the company was doing, which definitely helps you grow a lot faster, right? And I think the other thing that the education system also builds in us is that we never get the bigger picture. The bigger picture does not really exist in our life. We are only like 8th standard pass karo to 9th standard aega, 9th standard pass karo to 10th standard aega, clear 10th standard and go to a college, clear first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and get a job. Right? So that's why if you see, there's not a lot of conversation about career. There's not a lot of conversation about where do I see myself when I'm 40 or when I'm 45. And how is the job that I take right now going to affect where I'm going to be when I'm 40 or 45?
Yeah,
Right. It's only about I have like 10 options or 10 jobs to choose from, and A is paying me 10 lakhs, but B is paying me 8 lakhs, so I'm going to go for A. Right. But how does it affect you? Maybe B is going to give you a lot more money 5 years from now. But that conversation does not exist because we've never been made to think that way. Right? We've always been made to think from one exam to another, from like passing one to moving on to the other.
yes.
So that definitely affects the way we make our decisions, and then it affects the kind of companies you produce, which affects the kind of value that you generate, which affects the kind of economy that you become as a whole. Right?
Yes.
Like I mean, why did we have like the BPO revolution? Because we are very good at taking orders and implementing them.
Yeah.
Right? We are very good at like just sort of, acha,
And
I
this
have to just look
happens
at
like a ripple effect. Like one idea is
exactly,
doing well, you see a humongous like in the next 5 years. There's so many startups and similar things coming up, and then
absolutely.
it all comes. Yeah.
It all comes back to that. I mean, the thing is that I always question, I always wonder that like Indians have, like we always say, right, like the best software developers in the world are Indian. Google CEO is Indian. Microsoft का CEO is Satya Nadella. Like like Indians are all, अगर Indians नहीं होते तो Silicon Valley चलता ही नहीं. So why don't we have Google and Facebook, right? Where is that? Why do we have Infosys? Right? Why are we doing, like, there was this one term that really like pissed me off to no level, was when the, like, where somebody in my class in SF and DBC actually said, oh yeah, Indians are all code monkeys. Right. And that hit me. I was like, what do you mean by that? Like they were like, yeah, you just like copy paste code, and that's just that's all you're good for. Right. And it wasn't something that I wasn't okay with that at all. Right. But when I thought about it and when I really tried to analyze that, why does this happen? It all came down to this entire system that we have, that we are born in, and that we sort of adapt over our lives, right? Where we sort of become okay with this. Like we become okay
Yes.
with this idea of, it's okay, I'm going to be 40, be married, have two kids, go to a job that I hate, given my 8 hours, out of which I'll work for only 3 hours, and like take a lot of breaks in the middle, and I'm doing something only because it gets me money, not because it gets me personal satisfaction, not because it makes me better as a person, not because I'm driven by the passion in it. Right? It's only because I'm getting money out of it. Which leads to this entire psychology of, I would pick like a BPO job over a creative job. Right. And yeah, for to get this mindset change in a billion people obviously is a massive challenge,
Yeah.
but it can happen. I think gradually it will definitely lead to a point where we will start producing a lot of things. And this again is specific only for tech. There are a lot of other fields where we have actually built a lot of incredible things, right? And
Yeah, we are doing so great in sustainability, for example.
exactly, right? Like in sustainability, we are doing amazing things.
Right.
If I had to take like a very famous example, I would say Mangalan is a great example of how we could like produce very similar results with like minimal resources and be way better than what a lot of other solutions are. Like Jugaad, yeah, like Jugaad is one of like the coolest things that we have, right?
Yes.
So why aren't we Jugadoing it, right? It's
Yes.
it's it's about that. But I think in the end, it's also about what system you are used to gaming, because whatever system you are in, you will start gaming it, right? Like, and we are used to gaming a system that is only based on exams. We are used to gaming a system that is only based on marks. We are used
Yeah.
to gaming a system where somebody has to come first for somebody else to come second, right? Like I was thinking about this, like we don't have projects, and that's why collaboration is such a massive issue,
Yeah.
because we've never done collaborative projects ever. So this entire idea of let me help somebody get better and therefore I will also get better does not exist.
Yeah.
It's
No,
only about
everybody wants to do everything in the supply chain. They want to be
exactly,
best at everything in the supply chain. And yeah,
exactly. And this entire idea of the sum of the whole is greater than its parts is not something that we understand ever, because whether it's be in school or in colleges, you have never done that cohesive exercise of let five of us come together and build something. And that is when you'll realize that, like more people can add to you, which will eventually make you better as well.
Yeah,
So, yeah, that's that. I think that is how the system actually affects the entire outlook of a country.
right.
Right. That is how it affects the entire, uh, like what you strive for, right? Or what you believe in, or what you want to work towards, or what is the definition of success for you. All of that changes depending on what school has taught you as success, or what school has taught you as gaming the system. So, yeah, I think one thing, again, you wanted one sentence, but I said a lot of them. But I think it's
I
just
prefer this.
yeah, I think it just yeah, like education needs to just teach you how to question things. That's it. Like in today's world, because answers to bathere pade hai. Like answers are easily available by one Google search, right? And thankfully we live in a world where if you truly want to learn like quantum physics, right, you can learn it in a week. If you truly want to learn it. So there's not a lack of answers, there's not a lack of information. There's a massive lack of questions. There's a
Yeah, and
massive
there's
lack
a
of
lack of
people.
curiosity.
Lack of curiosity, exactly,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because again, we haven't been taught like another example right from my childhood, right, is like if I would read any book which wasn't a textbook, it was looked down upon. And it was like, why are you wasting your time reading books? Can you imagine like people actually told me, why are you wasting your time reading books? So, but it's true, right? Because you are like कि सिर्फ उतना ही करो जिससे तुम्हें 36 marks मिल जाए, or 99, depending on which side of the spectrum you lie on. But that's what you're optimizing for, right? So, of course, why will there be curiosity? What should I be curious about? Why should I be curious? Nobody has ever taught me to be curious in the first place. Like, I've never been rewarded for being curious. That is what
Yeah.
drives you. Like,
Yeah.
rewards drive you. Like,
Exactly.
nobody rewards you for being curious. Nobody rewards you for being creative, right? You're only rewarded for writing the perfect answer on a piece of paper,
Yeah.
which then translates to let me create this report and send to my manager. So, usko, like, they will think that I've done a lot of work, right? And then that's a cycle. Like, it's a cycle that needs to be broken.
Yeah. So, Raj, it was a really, really, really amazing conversation. I think
Yeah,
everybody, go ahead.
yeah, I was just saying, yeah, it was too much fun. It was fun to like explore these things, right? And it was good for me as well because, like, when you're running a company, you get busy with like the day-to-day activities of it, and you lose like the entire idea of why did you start this in the first place. So for me, it was a very good reminder as well to go back and sort of think about कि अच्छा हाँ यार मतलब ये करना था. Like everything else is obviously happening, but this is like at the core of it. And yeah, it was great. I'm really happy that we had this conversation
And
about
Raj, the best thing is if I was sitting there and we were talking, if we would be talking, we would be talking almost the same things.
yeah, that's right,
Yes,
yeah, it,
yes,
it would be we would be talking about similar things,
exactly.
and that's the thing, right, Saidi? I think the idea is that what I see, and which is why I'm very hopeful, is that more and more people are having these conversations, right? More and
Exactly.
more people are getting conscious of this. More and more people are okay with saying that, yeah, it's okay. We are not going right about this. Like, I'll give you an example of, I think Niti Aayog, I met Niti Aayog, and even they are aware of Industrial Revolution 4.0. Even they are aware of, like, how do we sort of teach somebody something as basic as how to Google search, right? And as a whole, I think as a country, we are thinking in that direction. And obviously, it's not easy to change 1.3 billion people overnight. And it's not going to
Yeah,
happen
we
overnight.
can't
It's going to
forget the
be,
1.3 billion people.
yeah, we cannot. Like, and it's
Yes.
the thing with like big numbers, no, is that it's impossible to understand how big that number is, right? Like, there's this
Exactly.
thing of, like, I think a million seconds is like 2 or 3 hours or something, or like a day or something, but a
Yeah.
billion seconds is like 32 years or something like that, right? So we don't even realize how big is 1.3 billion, right? Like, I'll give you another example of like the efforts of the government in controlling COVID right now, right? And this entire situation of Corona and how are we dealing with it. A lot of people are like sort of saying कि ये भी कर सकते थे, वो भी कर सकते थे. but they're not realizing that we are 1.3 billion. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, like this is like cumulative population of entire Europe that is living
Yes.
in like one
No,
country.
without even creating awareness about what the government is already providing, we are questioning what is not happening.
Yeah, correct. So it's just that, like, and it's I think but I think it's step by step, right? It's step by
Yes.
step. It's like one step at a time. And the other thing that I feel and I truly believe is that perspective and thoughts are like viruses as well, right? The moment you move to like one kind of a thought, you can never go back. You can never, like, once you are in this idea of growth mindset is great, you can never go back to fixed mindset, right? Or once
Exactly.
you get over a bias, you can't really go back to being biased again. It's
Yeah.
very rare that that happens. So
Yeah.
I think the speed of change will be a lot quicker, even in the education system, even in the way we are like sort of seeing change. I think it's going to be a
Yes.
lot quicker than what we've imagined.
Yeah.
So
The number of advocates for these kind of things have also like increased in number and point.
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, like, and awareness. The other thing is with internet, there's so much awareness, like,
Yes.
that people are also realizing that, okay, this is the world is not only limited to like this village that I live in. The world is like a much bigger perspective, and
Yeah.
it's very easy to learn that perspective nowadays, even if you don't travel, right? So even if you don't travel, you can still easily understand,
Yeah.
like, like memes. I always find that fascinating that how memes people understand memes, this obscure reference where both of you get exactly what it's trying to say. Right.
Yeah.
Although it really does not make any sense. And that's only because I think for the first time in humanity, we are like one large organism. Right. And we empathize with each other and we sort of like relate to each other. Like right now, everybody understands what it is like to be in your own room for days on end. Right. And we empathize, which wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened if this happened, let's say, like 50 years ago. So,
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. I think this was great. I had a lot of fun.
Me too, Raj. It
And
was really nice catching up with you. Thank you so
yeah,
much for
it was,
joining me.
yeah, for sure. And I will see you soon as we can start flying and
Yes.
roaming around. Or
Yeah.
till then, we'll just meet virtually, I guess. So,
Yes,
yeah.
Raj.
All right. Thanks a lot, Saidi.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for joining.
All right. See you. Bye.
See you.